cricket. It was the fifth day of the third test, and it was in Adelaide. And I went with my son, my daughter-in-law, and my granddaughter to because I needed a break. I needed to clear my head of all the stuff, the crap that has been the aftermath of the horrific Bondi tragedy. And I needed that time because just felt so, I don't know how the rest of you feel, but I felt so overwhelmed by the vitriol, by the hate expressed towards politicians, to whoever sits on the other side. Now, I don't believe for a moment that hate should be expressed by anyone towards anybody else under any circumstance, in fact. Now, I've had objections to ideas that people have presented, particularly, as most of you know, from Sky News. I don't hate them. I just have an issue with the way they present their news, and I'm critical of them. And I'm concerned of a number of things. I think the thing that I'm concerned about, one of the most, is what direction we're going to take in terms of curtailing anti-Semitism. Now, I agree that anti-Semitism is a scourge. That it, for some reason, not for some reason, that it must be stamped out. That I think, and I agree. I'm going to read a statement by Bill Shorten, in a moment, where I think he summarises a lot of this quite neatly for all of us. But before I do that, I want to focus on the issues that we seem to have forgotten and draw a line between what actually is the issue and how we should confront it more appropriately. There is no dispute, apparently, that what happened on Sunday last week was the product of anti-Semitism, and which had been bred since October the 7th, 2023. There is no dispute, I think, that as a result of what Hamas did and the slaughter and the murder of so many innocent people was horrific at the extreme level. It was terrible. And the response in terms of claiming and declaring the horror that it was is quite appropriate, and I share in that response. What I do have a problem with is the need to ignore what has happened since then and the attitude of the Israeli government, and the fact that every time someone like myself suggests that what the IDF are doing is wrong and that the slaughter of innocent people in Gaza is wrong, that any time someone like myself mentions that, we're identified for some particular reason, because we're anti-slaughter, because we're anti-murder, no matter who's doing it, that if you're identifying the Israeli government as doing it, somehow that equates to being anti-Jewish. And that couldn't be further from the truth. And as I've said many times before, we need to acknowledge there are many Jews who feel exactly the same way that I do about what the Israeli government's doing in Gaza. And then I was thinking last night that as horrible as the shooting of that little girl, that 10-year-old Matilda, a name which will resonate, I think, for decades to come, because it's an innocent life taken. And then I was thinking about Muhammad, the young kid who's waiting to get something to eat because he and his family are starving in Gaza. And an IDF soldier shoots him in the forehead and kills him. And I think, who's the murderer here? There are two lots of murderers. There's the terrible terrorists in Bondi, and then there is the IDF soldier. And then there's the government that bombs schools and destroys hospitals and has killed some 60,000+ people. And many of you may disagree, and that's fine. But I'm horrified by what they're doing. Now, should we be more horrified by what's happened in Bondi? Because that's home. That's because, we're Australians and it's happening to Australians. And it's horrible, and I feel horrible about it. Yet, what's happening in Gaza and what the IDF are doing is equally as horrible. One may feel more intense because it's happened on our own soil. The other's happening tens of thousands of kilometres away, in a place that many of us have never visited, amongst people that we don't know. I'm asking the question, is Muhammad's life in Gaza more important than Matilda's life in Australia? And I value all life. But to be able to cite what's happening in Gaza as being as horrible is seen as somehow inconsistent with the way we should view international politics, or the way we should view the behaviour of another country against people they hate. Hate is hate. Simple as that. It's wrong in all its forms. And the hatred that I'm now seeing towards Albanese government also I find repulsive. Not that I think for a moment that that they couldn't have done things differently. I don't know, and I don't know whether any of us do whether or not they could have prevented the guns from being purchased by the murderers or the terrorists. I don't know the answer to any of that. People are surmising that this person bought a couple of guns very shortly before the massacre. Those policies will be changed. My argument always has been, well, do we need guns? Does anybody need a gun? Maybe farmers and shooting competitions, and maybe they do. I don't know. But the people in the community in the cities, do they need guns? No, I don't think so. So I guess at the end of the day, we can blame. Susan Lee today came out in the most angry, obnoxious way attacking the government, because there just doesn't seem to be an opportunity here to be conciliatory, to even work together to solve the problem. And there are many problems here that need to be resolved. But the opposition now have decided to use this as a political fight. The first time, I think, in years that they've had an opportunity to really attack the government in a way which they believe will be productive. So I'm going to take us to this quote from Bill Shorten, which I think is an important one. He said, the University of Canberra had told which is short, the Australians, the Jewish Australians had repeatedly warned of rising hostility after October the 7th Hamas attacks, only to be dismissed by institutions that underestimated the threat and treated them like they were crying wolf. In fact, there is a wolf. I'm not sure other people took their fears as seriously as they should have. I think in the past, higher education authorities have underestimated the level of the threat. And as a former Cabinet Minister, I think that a lot of institutions in Australian life have been guilty of naivete. We think that our land, being girt by sea, means we're immune to these historical hatreds, and we're not. And I have to agree with Bill. I think there is a sense of naivete in Australia. And to some extent, we must find a way to deal with that. Now, the other question, I guess, that I am also asking is, how would this affect things politically? And I'm sure Albanese is going to be unpopular for a while as a result of all of this. And it wouldn't have mattered. If the Liberal Party were in power, the same thing would have happened. The retribution from the Labor Party would have been just as intense as it is from the Liberal Party. I don't think there's any question about any of that. But how are we going to respond? I guess that's the real question that I'm asking. And how are we going to equate death, whether it be in Gaza, in the Middle East, or anywhere else in the world, compared to what happens on our own soil? And so there's this article in the Sydney Morning Herald. Australians are divided over how connected and cohesive the country is, as they reckon with the target and killing of Jewish Australians celebrating Hanukkah. About 38% of people regard the overall level of social cohesion as good, 30% rated poorly, and 32% are unsure. Resolve polled 1,010 Australians between Wednesday and Saturday, producing results with a margin error of 3.1. Okay, fair enough. The Albanese government on Thursday said it was implementing all recommendations from the anti-Semitism envoy, commenced a hate speech crackdown, and on Friday revealed the details of a gun buyback as part of broader national gun reforms. Earlier in the week, Albanese was the target of visceral criticism from the Jewish community. Former Liberal Prime Minister John Howard and former Liberal Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, who blasted his leadership on anti-Semitism. And I'm going to do another post in relation to political opportunism, I think, in relation to them, but I'll speak more about that later. So what it did show was that amongst all voters, so asking the question, overall, how would you rate Australia's level of social cohesion, people feeling connected and belonging to a country with clear values? And this is worth it. So very good to good was 27%, undecided was 32%, poor 17%, and very poor 13%. So remember here we're asking, how would you rate Australia's level of social cohesion? It seems very, very fractured. And what I get out of this, I guess, is that that the combination between undecided, the good 27%, 10% is 50. So that's 60% between undecided and all voters. The point is that there's a lot of people who feel that we're fractured as a society. And it takes governments and oppositions to work together to resolve this, not to develop hatred and increased hatred towards each other, which is actually what we're seeing now from Susan Lee. There's a lot in this, and I plan to generate more conversations in regard to this over the next few days, because this is an important topic, and it is one that worries me greatly. But I want to finish with that reminder that Muhammad is as important as Matilda. That the death of anyone is horrible when they're attacked by terrorists. Horrible at any time, but particularly when they're attacked by terrorists. And I believe that the terrorists are also those people waging war against Gaza. And I believe that they're also Hamas waging war against the Jewish people in Israel. There is no excuse, but we need to bring the temperature down, and we need to be calmer, more conciliatory, and more understanding about other people's perspectives. But certainly, we need to do more.